Good evening and welcome to the Legion Cantina. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the Leia Organa Commander expansion for the Rebel faction in Star Wars Legion. So Leia, she's kind of the sort of default option, in my opinion, for the commander in Rebels. If you aren't picking sort of Han Solo or maybe just a basic Rebel officer, I think Leia is kind of the one that is going to be most consistent. She doesn't do anything super flashy, but she is able to support your army really well. She's really good at generating dodges, and just with that inspire as well, just keeping your army going. So, going through her strengths, her two command slots are really useful, and I think this is one of the main benefits of running Leia over, for instance, Han or Commander Luke or Rebel Officer is having those two command slots, because very often with a lot of Rebel lists you're going to see now, you need the underworld connection for the two mercenary operatives, which can be, IG, Din, Bad Batch, whatever you want to run. But then also you have that second slot, which is ideal for either vigilance, which you can take if you're focusing on dodges, but also you can be taking improvised orders for just a bit more order control in Rebels, which is going to pay off quite often when you have such poor order control. Her exemplar, nimble, and dodge just work so well together. Like, you should normally, as long as she's going fairly early in the turn, have a dodge or two on her. And obviously, if you're running Wicket as well, which is a nice combination, that can go a bit further. But basically, it means that with that range 2 on exemplar now as well, as long as you can plant her fairly centrally in and amongst your troops, it will just enable you to have sort of more cover and give them significantly more survivability, especially if you're running Rebel troopers who'll be getting that nimble as well. So it really can go quite a long way for just keeping your army going, maybe an extra turn, which is super important now for tagging those objectives. Her 3 red dice at range 3 with sharpshooter is not bad at all. It's very consistent. You're very likely to hit 3, and normally you'll have a crit or 2 in there as well. So yeah, it is just really helpful. I don't think this is something you want to be doing super often, but like, it can be really clutch sometimes for just, if there is a unit that you really need to finish off on an objective, you can pretty reliably put 3 hits into them, which is super nice. As I said, the Inspire 2 and even her Courage 2, like on those Courage 1 troops, can be really useful for making sure they're only suppressed rather than panicked and things like that, which is, again, really useful scoring objectives. Not as great for making sure they have good action economy, but it is good for those late game objectives which you need to be scoring. As people who've been following the channel for a while will probably know, I think her synergy with Wicket is really nice. I think they complement each other really well. I think Wicket is just good value. He doesn't necessarily have that high roll potential that some heroes have, like Han or possibly Luke, but he is going to be really consistent. And for instance, his independent dodge 1 and his forest dwellers and things like that just gives you those dodges, which mean that you'll have a dodge ready to go on Leia, which either triggers her nimble or can be used to protect another troop as well. So those proactive dodges are really nice for just making sure that you're actually going to get value from them, rather than if they come down later in the turn, you might already have dead units and they'll be useless. 75 points is not bad at all. It's good value. The Rebel Officer is obviously a chunk cheaper. I think Rebel Officer's 50 points now or something. So there is a reason to run a Rebel Officer if you're purely trying to save points. But Leia does have a significant number of upgrades over the Rebel Officer, and you get her command cards, which can be a bit of a benefit as well. Her 2-pip, No Time for Sorrows, is still a pretty decent command card. Like, getting that speed 1 move is really nice. She also has a beautiful friendship with Wicket, which, again, if you're running those two, is a bit of a no-brainer, I think. So yeah, I think her command cards are fine, but I will come on to her 3-pip in a bit. Weaknesses. Courage 2 is still not great, and it does mean that often, I mean, if she's getting shot multiple times, realistically, you're probably only getting 1 action from her, and with the way Legion is now, almost certainly one of those actions is going to have to be a move, which means you're not getting value from that take cover and things like that. So unless she's behind LOS blocking and just not being shot at all, it's tricky for you to get off multiple actions with Leia. White defense size still not very good, and yeah, it does make her. Obviously, she's got the nimble and the dodge generation, which is nice, but no low profile, nothing like danger sense or anything, so no extra tricks beyond those dodges to keep her alive. I think there is actually a case sometimes to run situational awareness on her, just to make sure you are getting those dodges on those crits, because sometimes you can just, if a Bosk or something, for instance, or somebody with marksman is able to just slice straight through those dodges. And then you can't rely on those white saves to do anything realistically. Like sometimes they will, but also sometimes they'll blank out, and then suddenly you've taken like 3 wounds on Leia, and you have to play very, very cautiously. Her 3 red dice is not super scary. It's fine, as I've said, for like picking off a unit, but don't rely on her to be a good shooting unit. Like that's not her role. And the lack of Pierce as well is rough. Like her old blaster was a 3 black Pierce 1, which just made the sort of wounds a lot more consistent. Like you would hit less, but you would wound more often. And a lot of armies now do have those red saves, which again I think buffs the value of Pierce. So this change, obviously it's longer range now as well. So this change isn't like necessarily better or worse. It's just different. But yeah, don't rely on her to be dealing massive damage. Yeah, the command cards are pretty mediocre on the whole. Like her 1-pip's okay. Like those sort of, it's basically 6 red dice at long range, which is okay, but like I don't fully know when you would be playing that. Like maybe late game to try and pick off units on objectives. Maybe it's an okay turn play on like turn 5, but you don't want to be dropping that super early because you need that order control on rebels, which otherwise you're just not able to generate. I've kind of warmed up on her 3-pip a bit recently. I think it's mainly because I've been running the bus a bit more, and actually the combination of being able to get Leia and the bus off early to get, I run an unorthodox tactician on my bus, for instance, to get those aims and maybe the dodge from Shriv out early and things like that. It does kind of work okay. So like I think in that situation it's not bad, but it does also not, a lot of the time you're not going to use that because you don't want to be going sort of, you don't want all your activations to go too early and then almost like giving your opponent a pass in a way by burning another activation quickly, but it can sometimes situationally be quite useful. Her points do go up quite quickly because you're going to be filling her 2 command slots realistically, and then you're probably taking portable scanner as well to get her take cover 3. Should we note you don't have to take those, like take cover 2 is still absolutely fine, but it does just feel a bit nicer getting that extra dodge with each action as well, so that is quite a nice one. And then you're almost certainly running improv, and then it's just whether or not you need underworld connections or if you can afford to splash on vigilance. I think vigilance is fine. I think 12 points is still too much. I think if it came down to like 10 or maybe 8 or something, it might then, I don't know, become a little bit too good in a way, but like 12 points feels like a lot to pay for something that doesn't always generate the value you want it to. And her melee is pretty bad. Like it's better than hands, for instance, for whatever reason. But yeah, 3 black is not where you want to be in melee. And if you do get into melee, you're then probably just withdrawing. So yeah, not really a thing, I think, Leia in melee. In terms of the upgrades you can be running on her, as I've already said, like I think these are the main ones. It's just whether, I think improv is almost a must in Rebels now, and I think unfortunately because of how good some mercenary operatives are in Rebels, Underworld is almost a must as well. So being able to put both of those on one commander is really nice, and it does just give you a bit more control. I really like Vigilance when I can afford it, but points are quite tight often. In still at 1,000 points, bizarrely, points can still be quite tight, so Vigilance is sometimes just a bit too much. And yeah, Portable Scanner, just again for getting that, those 3 dodges can be really nice, and setting up the rebel troopers and things like that, even like getting them on sleeper cell or something, for instance, nice and early, because then if you can take cover a dodge on them and then have one to go on with exemplar as well, getting through like 2 dodges and things like that can actually be a bit more of a challenge. So it's not a must take, but it is an upgrade that will probably feel good quite a lot of the time. Her command cards, yeah, I think Leia's command cards are okay. Overall, as I've said, that 1-pip giving you that 4 to infinite is a bit fiddly sometimes, because with the way Legion is now, sometimes actually being able to be far enough away bizarrely can be quite tricky. So it isn't actually always going to be the case that you're going to be able to get all 3 of these shots off, but it is quite nice, and if nothing else, it deals out a bit of suppression, which can be quite useful. No Time for Sorrows is still, I think, a perfectly good command card, and like it can be really useful for helping, a force user or fleets or even sleeper cell, like just jump that little bit further forward, because actually a speed 1 move, including the base as well, is surprisingly far, and can like catch some people like off guard, as it were, because they're not expecting to be able to close that gap. So yeah, it's a decent command card, and the fact that it doesn't have to order Leia as well is quite nice, because it does just give you that flexibility. Beautiful Friendship, I really like. I think the teamwork with units that are good at generating tokens is super nice. And now Leia has Exemplar. Like, I ran this before Leia had Exemplar, and it felt okay. Now it feels really good. And when you get this off and like maneuvering those range 2 units like Wicket and Leia, I don't know, it's very satisfying in game. It doesn't necessarily always generate huge value, but it does feel good in a game. So yeah, I think a good command card, and it feels all right turn 1 because it allows you to sort of get this thing going early, and often you're not going to be needing to play super splashy command cards on that first turn unless you're doing Tack Strike or something ridiculous. So maybe more thinking about Rebels there. And yeah, the 3-pip, it's okay. Like, the range 1 to 2 is okay. Like, I think often Leia should be at range 1 to 2 of your army anyway, so it's fine. But yeah, this is a command card that where, like, if you don't have any more compelling 3-pips, this is like an okay command card, because also it's units, not troopers. So if you do need to order like a vehicle, like an AT-RT or something, it is there in the locker if you want it. So yeah, not a great command card, but a decent one, and can sometimes pay off pretty well. In terms of list building tips, basically what you want to do is put her with units that have nimble and have dodge synergy. Like, even like Ahsoka with her mastery, for instance, can pay off pretty well. Mando resistance as well, Sabine, all good things. You are gonna need units that can deal damage. That is not news to anyone, but Leia is not going to be the one to get in there and deal damage. She's going to be the one that enables your army to get in there and deal the damage itself. So yeah, I think Luke, IG, although Luke's not a great damage dealer sometimes, but yeah, I think Luke can be good. Like, even Bad Batch or something, right? Just things that can get in there, score those objectives while Leia sits a bit further back. You're going to want some other heroes with more proactive command cards than Leia. So that's, for instance, why Luke's in this list. I think Luke enables you to do really good, like some really nice plays. Although, obviously, you serve your master well is not what it used to be. But yeah, I think Luke and IG in this list do offer decent synergy with what Leia is trying to do. I just saw Recon Intel at 5 points on this. You can tell I made this list a while ago. That's sad. Yeah, just think of Leia as providing that sort of range 2 defensive ball. Like, it's like every unit has light cover, if you want to think of it like that, like old light cover, in that she normally just pulls off she just gets a hit off on each of them, which is quite nice. And yeah, I think she's just super consistent. Like, she's in almost every game you use her in, she's gonna do almost the same thing every time. Like, she's gonna sit. Wicket will sit close to the front of your lines. Leia will sit behind him at kind of range 2, try and stay in range of the rebel troopers and just keep them alive. And yeah, I think like it's nothing like super compelling, but it's also just really solid, and that having that in your army sometimes is just really valuable. Like, she doesn't have the high roll potential of like Han, for instance. I think basically in the competition for like best rebel commander, it's probably Leia versus Han right now. I think Han offers you something that is a lot more like proactive and can actually, provide a meaningful threat to your opponent. But then Leia is helping to mitigate the threat that your opponent is dealing to you. So it's just what you want them to do. I don't know how well Leia and Han would pair together, because also that then becomes quite expensive. Like, Han's normally coming in at about sort of 110-ish, maybe a bit more, and Leia with the upgrades here is coming in over 90. So suddenly spending 200 points on those two doesn't feel great when Bad Batch is 150. Like, yeah, so I think it tends to be one or the other. It will be interesting to see how Leia slots in after the buffs come in with like Lando and Jin and so on. Like, whether or not she still occupies this kind of role as one of the premium rebel commanders. I think she just plays really well with what the rebel faction do more than anything else. How would I use her on different deployments? Essentially, and yeah, you can imagine, you can probably see what's coming here. You basically, if in doubt, want Leia to just be out of line of sight of your opponent, but in line of sight of your units, because you need line of sight for Exemplar. So you just need to be able to see one model in the unit, and if she can do that, then other units that are at greater risk than her, she can just drop a dodge on them and give them more survivability. In general, there's no real motivation for her to push up any further than your troops. Like, I can't ever see that being a thing. So Here, as is kind of standard on like recover or breakthrough or whatever, you're probably going to drop the majority of your stuff kind of fairly into your sort of bottom right hand corner if you're the blue player here. And then you just want to pick whichever you like of your whichever side of your forces you think going to be more vulnerable, and then just drop Leia over towards that side. Try and go into range 2 of things. You can do some nice things with cohesion, for instance, where like if your unit leader is obviously pushed a bit further forward so you can get range for shooting, you can just leave one a person in your unit further back so that Leia is in range to drop those dodges off. But yeah, that's kind of it really. If they have big melee threats or units that can cut through that can deal out crits, you basically want to avoid those if you can. And also you want to avoid units that can deal a large amount of damage in one go. So for instance, if they have like, I'm going to come back to it again, the snail tank or the ATST or something, that's not really where Leia wants to be facing off. Like, she can normally take away enough damage against like, you know, a range 4 shot from, you know, some storms or whatever. Like she can normally deal with that quite nicely because that dodge will get rid of one hit and then maybe you're only dealing with one crit on her actual defense die, so that's okay. But against those really big dice pools, having like 1 or 2 dodges isn't going to help that much. And actually then suddenly if they're over the top of those dodges and over the top of cover, suddenly like if they're rolling 5 or 6 hits against your defense die, you can't rely on those. I know it sounds a bit stupid, but you can't rely on those saves coming through to keep you alive. So yeah, if you can, just keeping Leia tucked away out of line of sight blocking. For bunker assault, I think again you would just deploy fairly centrally, but then actually you don't need to worry about moving up that aggressively here because like essentially what Leia is most likely going to be doing is she will be sitting behind the troops that are tagging sort of your two objectives, definitely on the first couple of turns. And then to be honest, she maybe even barely wants to move much more than like range 1 away from your board edge because you don't want to be dealing with the units that you know are going to be coming straight up the center of the board from your opponent. One thing you can do with Leia that is quite nice is like if you want to and you have units that are able to shoot, you can just move on and just take an aim, for instance. Like especially if you're running Leia Wicket, you can just move on, take an aim, and then you have the aim ready to exemplar out as well. One thing I've been doing a bit recently when I've run Leia and Wicket is often with Wicket, if you're running Forest Dwellers, you have that initial Scout 2 move and then another Speed 2 move, but then you don't want to move up much more aggressively because you make yourself a bit too vulnerable. So on that sort of third action with Wicket, as it were, after your Scout and your normal move, you can then just be taking an aim as well, and with teamwork that will drop an aim over to Leia, and then suddenly she's got 2 aims to exemplar out. So I'm just thinking on something like bunker assault, for instance, where you're likely to maybe be a bit more bunched up in the center and you can actually get good value from those exemplar aims. That could be really useful. So yeah, just a little thing that can pay off really well with Leia sometimes is remembering that even though she's good at dodge generation, sometimes you can use those aims more proactively, and to be honest, you'll probably get a dodge or 2 from Wicket anyway. So yeah, that's a little strat that I've been using sometimes. But yeah, in terms of a tier list placing, I don't think it's S tier, purely because I think in terms of raw like power and like effect on the game, I don't think Leia can rival Sleeper Cell. But I think she is a pretty comfortable A tier. Like, I remember this is from a rebel perspective, not from like maybe slightly more powerful factions perspective. Like, I think just in terms of her consistency and like how well she synergizes with what rebels are trying to do, I think Leia's a really solid option. And like, she's never going to be a real weak spot in your army. She's always just going to be a unit that is very consistent and is going to make your army better. Like, that Inspire, those dodges is just super helpful. So yeah, I'm going to end up putting her, I think, I'm going to put her at the bottom of A tier, but I think that's because she is below 2 units that are pretty strong. So yeah. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I said before in previous video, I am going to try and focus on the units that have had their cards updated rather than, you know, going through a unit guide of a unit that just gets updated in the new year. So yeah, keep an eye out for things like fleets and Commander Luke, etc. coming soon. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you for the next one.